Imagine a chess game where you break all opening principles, moving the same pieces back and forth instead of developing your entire army and ensuring the king's safety. The viewers might think you have completely lost your mind, because your moves indeed look insane. But later it turns out you are not a madman, but a genius, as there is a deep strategic idea and fantastic tactical tricks behind your strange, unnatural moves. All this happened in the tactical masterpiece by the great Leonid Stein, the master of risk strategy. Let's dive in. Stein's opponent, Damjanovic, starts with e4, and Stein plays the Sicilian defense: c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes d, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, d6. White goes for the Richter-Rauser variation, bishop g5. The idea is to prevent black from playing e5 or the dragon variation g6, because if black plays e5, he permanently weakens the d5 square, and the main defender of this square, the f6 knight, would already be pinned in this case. And if black, instead of e5, tries to play the dragon variation g6, then white might even exchange his valuable bishop for the knight, and black would be forced to recapture with the e pawn, as his g pawn would be on g6, and after that the d6 pawn would turn into a weak, isolated, miserable pawn. Another idea behind bishop g5 is to move the bishop away from the king's way. So white will prepare the long castle, moving the king away from the center. The rook from d1 would put pressure on the d pawn, which by that time most probably would turn into a backward pawn, because black usually plays e6. And after castling queenside, white would be ready to initiate the pawn storm on the king side. How should black reply? The most natural and common reply, of course, would be e6, taking the important squares under control and vacating the e7 square for the bishop, after which black might consider the short castle. But in our game, instead of e6, Stein goes for a more risky continuation. Instead of developing his king side, he, in anticipation of white's long castle, immediately initiates counterplay on the queen side, bishop d7, vacating the c8 square for the rook in order to put pressure on the half-open c-file as soon as possible. White still could have continued in accordance with his initial plan, queen d2 followed by the long castle, but as he understood black's intentions, that black wants to initiate counterplay on the queen side as soon as possible, he decided to delay the long castle and launch his attack on the king side right away. He plays f4. However, by playing f4, white has weakened the king side, in particular the e3 square, and black would have exploited that. The strongest move for black would have been queen b6, which would attack the d4 knight for the second time, and white must do something about it. Besides that, the queen puts pressure on this diagonal, in particular eyeing the e3 square. So what can white do in this case? If he exchanges the knights, that would be in black's favor, because black recaptures with the pawn, and the pawn controls the important squares, preventing the white pieces from invading them. Besides that, the b file opens, and black gets a great counterplay on this file. Or if instead of exchanging the knights, white makes a better move, knight b3, then black can either play knight g4, threatening checkmate in one, or instead of knight g4, he can also consider the immediate invasion of the queen on e3, and all this might be quite unpleasant for white. But Stein doesn't play queen b6. Instead, he makes the intended move. When he played bishop d7, he vacated the c8 square, so he plays rook c8. But next move, black still can play queen b6. For this reason, white prevents it. He plays knight b3, moving the knight away from the d4 square, and it turns out that if black plays queen b6 now, it would come without a tempo, because the black queen isn't attacking the d4 knight, because the knight isn't on d4. It's true, black is threatening to invade the e3 square with a check, but white can prevent it by simply playing queen d2, and it turns out that the black queen is misplaced on b6 because she is blocking the b pawn, which usually moves forward in this variation. And if black plays knight g4, renewing the threat of the invasion, then as the knight doesn't control the d5 square anymore, white can play knight d5 with a tempo, attacking the queen and defending the e3 square, and white is better. For this reason, as queen b6 doesn't work, Stein makes another risky move. Instead of developing the king side, he plays a5, so he keeps developing his counterplay on the queen side, and he has created an immediate threat of a4, harassing the knight. And white won't be able to capture this pawn with the c3 knight because the knight is tied to the defense of the e4 pawn. Black would capture a much more valuable central pawn if the c3 knight captures on a4. So after a4 and the retreat of the b3 knight, the black pawn would move to a3, attacking the b2 pawn, destroying white's queen side and undermining the c3 knight. So a4 is a serious threat. For this reason, white develops his last minor piece, bishop b5, and takes the a4 square under control, preventing it. Now, of course, a4 runs into bishop takes a4. So let's look at the position. White has developed all his minor pieces, and as he has moved the bishop away from f1, he is ready to play queen e2. The queen wouldn't block the bishop anymore, and she would support the possible advance of the e-pawn to e5. Besides that, the white king would be ready to castle both queen side or the king side, so he would have both options. While black hasn't developed the king side yet, his position looks a little bit cramped, and his king is still in the center. So what should black do? If black's previous play looked just risky, his next moves look completely insane. Because instead of thinking about the development of the king side and the king's safety, Stein moves the already developed knight. He plays knight g4, which looks completely insane, but this move actually has two very deep ideas. One of them is a tactical one. Stein has in mind a fantastic tactical trick, and another one is a deep strategic idea. Let's first start with the tactical one. So, of course, by playing knight g4, Stein is eyeing the weakened e3 square. The knight might jump on e3, attacking the queen and the g2 pawn. However, white can defend against both of these threats, and the knight on e3 might get trapped. So, white simply plays h3, attacking the knight and taking the g4 square under control, and it seems that if the black knight invades the e3 square, it would get trapped. So the best thing black can do is just to return the knight to f6, after which black's position would be almost hopeless, because he would have just lost tempi in this case. But Stein still invades the e3 square, because, as I already said, he has in mind a fantastic tactical trick. Of course, the knight is attacking the queen and the pawn, but what if white simply plays queen e2, saving the queen, defending the pawn, attacking the knight, and the knight doesn't have any squares to retreat. All these squares, including the g4 square, are controlled by white. So, has Stein blundered the knight? No, he calculated everything. So, we have reached the first critical position. How should black save his knight? You can pause the video and try to find Stein's tactical trick. The obvious defense, queen b6, doesn't work, because white can simply play f5, opening the bishop's diagonal and attacking the knight for the second time, and the knight would fall. Instead, Stein, so when he played knight g4, he had to discover another insane move. Instead of thinking about the king's safety, he moves another piece, which has already been developed. The second knight jumps on b4. and indirectly defends the e3 knight. If the queen captures, of course, the knight would capture on c2 with a fork. Besides that, by playing knight b4, black doesn't just defend the e3 knight. He also creates an immediate threat. He is threatening to capture on c2. Both knights are attacking it. So it looks a little bit strange because white has developed all his pieces while black still hasn't developed his king side. But it seems that black is the side with the initiative. Black has created threats. The engine, of course, doesn't like black's play, but from human perspective, it isn't easy to play this position as white against the tactical genius. So, besides that, by playing knight b4, black has also opened this diagonal, and he offers the exchange of the bishops. As you see, black is a little bit cramped, and when you are cramped, exchanging pieces is a good idea, because in this case the space advantage of your opponent loses its significance. So how should white defend the c2 pawn? Of course, he could have played rook c1, but in this case his rook would be tied to the defense of the pawn. He would lose the possibility of the long castle. Besides that, the bishops would have been exchanged in this case. For this reason, white defends the c2 pawn with the bishop. He plays bishop d3, defending the pawn, also avoiding the exchange of the bishops, and he still will have the possibility of the long castle. So what should black do next? White has defended the c2 pawn. That means he is ready to capture the knight again, and the knight is still trapped. And remember, I told about the two ideas behind knight g4? Now we have already seen the tactical trick, and now it's time to find Stein's deep strategic idea, the strategic justification of the insane knight maneuvers. So what should black do next? His knight is still under attack. You can pause the video and try to find Stein's deep idea. Paradoxical as it may sound, by playing knight g4 a few moves ago, Stein prepared the most effective way of developing his kingside. The black knight isn't on f6 anymore, so Stein plays h6, and as the knight isn't on f6, white doesn't have an option of exchanging the bishop for the knight. So that means he must move the bishop. Of course, white could have exchanged the bishop for the knight by capturing the knight, but in this case black captures the valuable bishop. White can even win a pawn, but black has a great compensation for a pawn because he has the advantage of two bishops. The light squares in white's position are terribly weakened, and white doesn't have the dark squared bishop anymore to defend them. And by playing g6 followed by bishop g7, black would put more pressure on white's queen side. He would dominate the dark squares, and of course he would have great compensation for a pawn. For this reason, instead of capturing the knight, white makes a stronger move, the only move, bishop h4. And what next? Again, white is ready to capture the knight. And now we will see the whole beauty of Stein's idea. He prepared a pawn sacrifice. He plays g5 with a tempo, attacking the bishop. And this move has multiple ideas. One of them we can see right away. The g7 square is vacated for the bishop with a tempo. So bishop g7 will follow, most probably will follow later in the game. But we will see other ideas behind this move later. So what should white do? How should he react? He can either accept the sacrifice by capturing on g5, or retreat the bishop, or capture the knight. So let's look at these options. Of course, if he captures the knight, again, black captures the bishop. Of course, black's pawn structure is compromised, but black has great compensation, and white is... no, actually, white isn't up a pawn, just black's pawn structure is destroyed, but black has great compensation. He has the advantage of two bishops, again, dark squares, he would dominate them, and the g-file opens for the rook, so he would also put pressure on the half-open g-file. So queen takes e3 doesn't work. If he retreats the bishop, and the only square the bishop can retreat is g3, because f2 would be a terrible blunder, as the bishop would close the queen's way and the knight would capture with a check, followed by knight takes f4 and black is winning. So the only square the bishop can retreat is g3, but in this case black plays queen b6. This time it works, defending the knight, because the white bishop isn't on g5 anymore, and white cannot play f5, opening the g5 bishop's diagonal to attack the knight for the second time. So the knight is defended. White cannot kick it out by playing bishop f2 for the same reason. Knight takes g2, check would follow, and the knight is greatly placed. It prevents the white king from castling both the king side and the queen side, so black would be better in this case. For this reason, after Stein played g5, white makes the best move. He accepts the sacrifice. He captures on g5. But now we can see other ideas behind Stein's sacrifice, pawn sacrifice. Another idea, besides vacating the g7 square for the bishop, is that he has deflected the white pawn from f4. On f4, the white pawn used to control the important e5 square, but now it doesn't, and the e5 square turns into a great blockading square for the black knight. But that's not all. Stein's idea is much deeper than that. So he captures on g5, white captures, recaptures on g5, white is up a pawn, and the knight is again under attack. But now we can see another idea. The rook, without making a single move, can be considered a developed piece now. So black has, paradoxically as it may sound, black has solved the problem of the king side. So the rook puts pressure on the h-file, and the h3 pawn is pinned now. So black can save his knight. The g4 square is available again. Knight g4. White cannot capture because of rook takes h1, of course. So the knight is greatly placed, and if white unpins the h-pawn, then the knight always has this great blockading square, so it would be greatly placed on e5. The rook is active. The bishop would be greatly placed on g7. So black definitely has a very good compensation for the pawn. Both of his rooks are very active, not only the h rook but also the c rook, while the white rooks aren't doing anything. So black, although the engine doesn't like Stein's play, from human perspective, black definitely has great compensation for a pawn. So what should white do? Of course, according to the engine, white should castle either queen side or the king side. But let's look what happens. Let's first start with the long castle. If white castles long, moving the king away from the center, and as the rook is defended now, the pawn is unpinned, so white is threatening to capture the knight again. But black can play knight e5, the most natural move. The knight is occupying the great blockading square, and black is ready to play a4, a3, destroying white's king side, undermining the knight, followed by queen a5, bishop g7, the rook is very active, so to a human all this looks scary. So it's understandable that white didn't castle queenside. The first line, according to the engine, is the short castle. But again, if white castles short, moving the king away from the center and again unpinning the pawn, again the knight is under attack, but the rook is attacking white's king side. The bishop is directed towards white's king side. Black can also bring the queen into the attack. Queen b6 check is the best move, forcing the white king to move to the corner, and that means the pawn is pinned again, so the knight isn't under attack. So again, white is up a pawn, but his king is under pressure. And bishop g7, a4 is coming, so black is going to increase the pressure, and it isn't easy to defend this position for a human, although the engine gives a slight advantage to white. For this reason, it's also understandable why white didn't castle kingside. But still, castling kingside would have been his best option, because what he did in the actual game is much worse. So he decided to delay the castle and instead to exchange his bad bishop, which is restricted by the e4 pawn, and there is no need to keep this bishop on d3 to defend c2 anymore, because the black knight has retreated from e3, c2 is defended. So it's understandable that white wanted to exchange his bad bishop for black's good bishop, and maybe only after that he would castle, either kingside or the queenside. So he plays bishop b5. But this move turned out to be a blunder. So you can pause the video and try to find why is this move a blunder. Find black's tactical shot. The pressure on the c-file tells. Stein, who is down a pawn at the moment, sacrifices the knight. He captures on c2 in order to lure the white queen to the c-file. So white must capture, and now that the queen is on the c-file, the c3 knight is pinned. That means it isn't really defending the bishop, so bishop takes b5. Stein gets the pawn back. Materially, the position is equal now, but Stein keeps his positional advantage. He definitely has the initiative because he has the advantage of two bishops and more active pieces. Knight d4 follows. Let's see what happens next. Attacking the bishop. The bishop returns to d7 and white unpins his knight. Queen d2 follows. Bishop g7. Finally, this move is played. The bishop is activated. And so black is better. He is more active. And white realizes this. So he tries to seize the initiative. He plays, as his bishop is attacking the e7 pawn and is pinning it, he attacks this pawn for the second time by centralizing his knight. So the pawn is under attack and we have reached another critical position. What should black do about it? How to defend the e7 pawn? You can pause the video and try to find Stein's brilliant tactical idea. So, of course, we are not going to consider the moves, seriously consider the move like bishop f8, as it's terribly passive and black loses all the dynamism of his position, which he has been accumulating for such a long time with his creative play. Neither we are going to look at f6 for the same reason. Yeah, e7 pawn is defended, but the bishop's diagonal is being closed after that. And knight f6, of course, would be even worse, because after bishop takes, knight takes, and e takes, black's pawn structure is ruined. Black lost all the dynamism of his position, the initiative, and his king would be in trouble. White can safely castle kingside, and as black doesn't have sufficient attacking resources and the black king is in trouble, white is winning. So instead of all these passive defenses, Stein keeps playing actively and he keeps creating threats. He counterattacks. Rook c4, attacking the d4 knight for the second time. And white has no option. The knight cannot retreat because the rook would capture the unguarded e4 pawn with a check and also defend the e7 pawn. But what if white captures on e7 with a tempo? Stein has calculated all this. So his queen is under attack. If black captures on d4, which is the first move that comes to mind, counterattacking the white queen in his turn, that would be a mistake, because after bishop takes, rook takes, king takes, it turns out that the white king has captured, the rooks are connected, and the h-pawn is unpinned. So the knight is under attack. White is up the exchange, and if black captures the bishop, white can capture the knight, and white is still up the exchange and he is winning. But Stein calculated a different variation. Instead of rook takes d4, he prepared the queen sacrifice. He captures on e7. A brilliant tactical idea. White, of course, has no option. He must accept the sacrifice. Knight takes e7. And now we will see Stein's idea. He captures the second minor piece for the queen with a tempo. The queen is under attack. The knight is under attack. So after the queen retreats, black will get the third piece for the queen. And the e4 pawn is also under attack. So what should white do? The only way to try to save the knight and the queen together and retain the material advantage is queen g5, defending the knight, also attacking the bishop, fails. Because in this case the pawn falls with a check and white falls under a terrible attack. So the king has only 3 moves. Let's say so if the king moves to d2, of course, white loses on the spot because of bishop h6 and the queen is lost. If the instead of king d2, white plays king d1, then knight f2 check is possible, and after king c2, rook e2 check. Let's pay attention to the great coordination of the black pieces. So the knight controls these squares. The king cannot move there. The bishop controls, attacks the b2 pawn. So if the king moves to c1, still bishop h6, winning the queen. If the king moves to b1, then the b2 pawn falls, followed by checkmate in 2 moves. And finally, after the best move, king b3, the white king still finds himself in a mating net after a4 check, and let's say king c4, rook e4 check, followed by checkmate. And finally, if instead of king d2 or king d1, white makes the best move, king f1, it still doesn't help because so the g7 of course is under attack, but black can save the bishop with a tempo. For example, bishop f6 is possible, and after white moves the queen, black gets the third minor piece. Of course, he must be careful. Rook takes e7 would be a terrible mistake because of queen a8 check followed by checkmate. So instead, black can capture with the king. It's absolutely safe because white cannot create any threats to the black king. So formally, white has material advantage. He has a queen and a pawn for the 3 minor pieces, but look at his position. His rook isn't playing. His queen doesn't have any targets of attack, and the white king is in trouble, while the black king is absolutely safe. Knight e3 check is coming, followed by bishop d4. Let's say, just to illustrate, if white plays rook e1, developing the rook, hoping to exchange the rooks to decrease black's pressure, knight e3 check is possible, and after king f2, bishop d4, all pieces take part in the attack. Knight c4 discovered check, winning the queen is threatened. After white parries this threat with queen d2. Of course, black must be careful. Knight c4 discovered check would be a terrible blunder because the rook is pinned. White can simply capture the bishop and white is winning. But of course, instead of making this terrible mistake, black can bring another rook into the attack, rook h5, and after the terrible check, rook f5 check, the white king falls under a terrible, devastating attack. Black is winning. So, for this reason, white realizes that the enemy minor pieces, 3 minor pieces, would be much stronger than his useless queen. For this reason, instead of queen g5, white decides to return the queen in order to survive. So he captures the rook, and after Bishop takes d4, he saves his knight. And now we can look at the result. For two minor pieces, white has a rook and a pawn, but first, his pawn, his central pawn, falls after knight f2 with a fork, so white must save his rook, after which the pawn falls. So black has the material advantage, but that's not even the most important thing. The most important thing is that the black pieces dominate the whole board. The white rooks are absolutely useless, while black minor pieces are greatly placed in the center and they control the whole board. White finally castles with a tempo, attacking the bishop. Bishop e5. The bishop is supported by the pawn, also defending it, and it controls both the king side and the queen side. Rook e1 follows, attacking the knight, and it turns out that not only the bishop remains in the center, but also the great knight will remain on the great central square. While the white rooks, what are they doing? Nothing. They have no targets of attack. White tries to activate the rook, rook d3, king f7, bringing the king closer to the center. White tries his last chance. He wants to undermine the knight. The knight is supported by the f5 pawn, so g4 follows, but this weakens the h3 pawn, and again a fork follows. Knight f2, attacking the rook and the pawn. The rook must move, after which the pawn, another pawn, falls. White plays knight b6, attacking the bishop. If the bishop moves to c6, then the f5 pawn falls, but Stein first gives a check with a tempo, closing the rook's file, and only after the king moves, he plays bishop c6, attacking the rook, and it turns out that besides totally dominating the whole board, black will also push the pawn forward. So the rook is under attack, and after it moves, let's say to d3, black captures, and the pawn is unstoppable. It on every step towards g1, it will be supported by black pieces. The bishop, the dark squared bishop, the light squared bishop, and the knight will support its advance. So for this reason, after bishop c6, white resigned. And now I recommend watching an even more insane masterpiece by Stein against none other than Victor the Terrible Korchnoi. But first, I'd be grateful if you like this video, write comments, share and subscribe, as all this is really helpful for the channel growth.